This is part 6 in my series on the mechanical raid team, and the boss I will be covering in this edition is the Screamer Killer. I did momentarily have a reservation about covering this boss, and then I realised that reservation was stupid. And the reservation was that this boss does have a correctly deserved reputation of being very easy to handle with the mechanical team. You can do a lot of damage against this boss with a good mechanical team. Over 1,000,000 is very easy if you know what you're doing. However, all in life is never really that simple, because whilst my mechanical team that I have currently is perfectly able to endure the damage of its attacks and endure its summons and kill them easily, not summons, adds, sorry, kill them easily, when you're developing your mechanical team, you can't rely on having strong characters all the time. You're building them up. You might not have the optimal characters that you need. For example, for a long time I didn't have Shosil, so I was using Ravas instead. So when I finally got Shosil, I kind of had to relearn how to fight this boss on all of the maps, because Shosil is a very different beast to Ravas, and Ravas is better at killing the boss adds, whereas Shosil is better at dealing more damage to the boss over the course of the battle, which to me is more important. So it is actually very important to have a good grasp on the fundamentals of this boss and understanding them, because chances are, if you're bringing up your mechanical team, you will have to change your tactics a lot based on which characters you happen to be developing, which characters you already have developed, the toughness of the boss that you happen to be facing in that particular battle. It could be, at the uncommon rarity, or it could be at the legendary rarity. And there are different numbers of warriors on the map for different rarities. I'm not sure if the number of Barb Gaunts and Hormagaunts changes, but that's something to take into account too. And speaking of the Hormagaunts, these ones here, they do damage of 1,100. And you might think, blimey, if your team isn't very well developed, you might think, geez, that's quite high. That would kill one of my characters in one hit, maybe. I don't know. But all of my characters, they have armor stats of over 1,000. So those Hormagaunts present absolutely no threat to my characters, which means it's actually a good thing for them to be there, in my specific case. In your case, it might just add more bodies onto the field and make things harder, because you need to work through those Hormagaunts to actually get to fighting the boss in the first place. And you may have trouble killing those Hormagaunts, I don't know. So there's a lot of variables involved, and it's, again, all depends on toughness of the boss, how good your stuff is. And I can't just assume that anyone who's watching my guides will just automatically have, diamond free everything with level 50 abilities, blah blah blah, because if you are in that situation, you probably don't need to be watching this video in the first place. So I'm not going to make a video for absolutely no reason. So let's get into why, in this particular case, I've chosen to have 3 Hormagaunts on the map. So if there were no Hormagaunts on the map, I am only able to spawn 2 summons in the first round, because my Tan does enough damage that I can't reliably expect him to get 2 ranged shots off at a Tyranid warrior and not kill it in the first shot. So I don't want to leave anything up to chance, which means I have the Hormagaunts on the field to give Tan an extra target to shoot at, so that I can guaranteed get 2 Skitari out in the first round. And also, thanks to the Hormagaunts being there, I can get a sniper drone deployed in the first round. And the target that I decide to shoot at with Shosil is one of the Hormagaunts. I did actually watch someone else's replay posted on YouTube of this battle that they'd done recently. The channel name's Firedrake110, if you're interested. They did over 1,000,000 damage against this boss. And what they did in the first round was they actually had Shosil where I have my Eldryon standing. And they moved Shosil here and shot this warrior and killed him in one hit. And obviously I can't do that, because my Shosil is gold free, and he doesn't do anywhere near enough damage to take out the warrior in one hit. So again, it's all well and good sharing your replays, showing, look how amazing I am, look how much damage I've done. I've done that. I'm sure many other people do that. It's quite satisfying to do 1,000,000 damage, I will admit, but it's very hard for someone who is, again, bringing their team up to a high level to necessarily replicate any of what you're doing. So it's much more important for them to understand what's going on and what they need to do so that they can adapt on the fly to changing situations with this boss as their team progresses. You know, that's not even getting to the machine of war you have. So I have the Forge Fiend, for example, which isn't the best choice against the Screamer Killer. The best choice is Galatian, but simply put, I am too poor for Galatian. I don't have the resources to put into him. I still have plenty of legendary Imperial badges that I need to spend on Tan and Actus, and so that's not going to be a factor for me for a long time. And in terms of prioritizing, you see people doing, I did 1.4 million damage or whatever with Galatian against a Tervagon or Screamer Killer or what have you. I don't know, I'm just making the number up a bit, but sure, it is the best choice, but Galatian requires a big investment in terms of resources and badges to get his primary ability up to a level where he can survive being in melee with the Screamer Killer, and you can use him to his optimum. And general, just in terms of prioritizing, I wouldn't consider him too important here. He's a way of winning harder, but he won't get you into a position where you're able to win a battle in the first place, I guess I'll say. He's a good resource when you are already at the top of your game, but don't worry too much about that. So I have the Forge Fiend. It's not particularly useful here. I could have used it. I tried to use it in a way that was useful, which almost worked but didn't, and I'll explain that later. But yeah, the Machine of War choices for this boss aren't particularly good, so just go with whatever you can, really. Although, to be honest, I wouldn't trust the Malleus launcher, because the Cadian guardsmen spawned by its passive tend to be really stupid and get themselves killed by the boss, which, due to its abilities, actually increases its damage, so maybe watch out for that. So I've gone through the reason why I have the extra Hormagaunts here. The other reason for that, actually, is the number of Hormagaunts on the field is dictated by the Winged Prime boss being alive. And if you want to remove all of the Hormagaunts from the field, then you have to fully kill the Winged Tyrannid Prime. Whereas if you want to get rid of 3 of them, you only have to sort of get through 2 notches in its health bar. And the Winged Prime fight, because of the mechanics of it, it can soak up a lot of raid tokens. And the Screamer Killer, I don't think you get it above Legendary 2 anymore. So its health here starts out at 7.5 million. If you've got people doing 1,000,000 damage per attack with mechanical teams in your guild against this boss, then there isn't really enough time. If you're doing a lot of attacks, then maybe the extra bonuses you'd get from killing the Winged Prime would be worth it over your entire guild, but my guild can get through this boss in essentially 8 attacks. And so it's really not worth the extra effort of getting through the Winged Prime, taking it all the way down to 0 health to just maybe get a little bit extra damage onto the boss per attack, because we beat it in 7 attacks rather than 8, big deal, It's obviously you'll have to figure out for yourself and your guild whether you think it's important to take out the Winged Prime, but of all the side bosses, I think the Winged Prime is one of the most difficult ones, and it's definitely one that you should think about in terms of, is it really worth attacking it? Another problem I think that might afflict a lot of people, because it afflicts my guild, and I've mentioned it more than one occasion, not trying to be annoyed or anything, but the Screamer Killer has 7.5 million health, and you can do 1,000,000 damage per attack against it. At least we can, as I've said. So throwing a bomb at it that does 8,000 damage really doesn't do a great deal in terms of the overall outcome. I tend to save my bomb for when a boss is at extremely low health to maybe finish it off, but generally I won't just chuck my bomb around willy-nilly. I'll wait for a good opportunity to use it. And I would say that because of the difficulty of dealing decent damage against the winged prime, it's actually a prime target for your bomb, because there is a lot higher premium on the damage that you do to the wing prime with a bomb than there is on the Screamer Killer. If you're only doing 50k damage per attack against the wing prime, then 8k damage with a bomb is, oh yeah, that's actually pretty good. But if you're doing 1,000,000 damage against the Screamer Killer with an attack, then 8k damage with a bomb, it's kind of like whatever, essentially. So that's quite a long side tangent that isn't even related to this particular battle. Well, I guess it is, sort of, but not what you're seeing on the screen right now. So let's take a look at something on the screen, and I'll go through the boss's abilities that I think are relevant. The first one is its Death Scream, and this is a really, really nasty ability because so its melee attack does physical damage, its Unparalleled Ferocity ability does physical damage, Living Battering Ram ability does mostly physical damage. So as long as your characters have the stats to withstand this boss, it really can't do anything much to them. But the Death Scream, because it deals plasma damage, 65% of that damage will be going through armor no matter what. So even if you have tough units, this can actually be quite devastating to them. So 65% of 1,325, that's, say, roughly about 800 damage. Then multiply that by 6, it's doing 4,800 damage. That's really going to hurt. It's not like when my row getting hit by that's going to take more than half of his health, assuming his camouflage trait doesn't reduce the hits or something, but forgetting that, it's probably going to take more than half of his health, whereas being hit by its Unparalleled Ferocity ability will do practically 0 damage to him. And what's worse with the Death Scream is it also does biological splash damage, so that's 30% piercing, which isn't as bad, but it's still a lot, especially if you have underleveled characters to fight against this boss. So in general, what you'll really want to be doing is completely avoiding having it Death Scream your team, because of the high level of damage to the primary target, and also the splash damage to all the surrounding targets as well. Of course, when it's able to stun, it's even worse, but you want to kill the Neurophrope to get rid of that ability to stun anyway. Well, actually, you can avoid the ability fairly easily, but you'll want to kill the Neurophrope to get rid of Barb Gaunts, because their suppression is very annoying. So that's the Death Scream, and it likes to use that when it has nothing in melee with it. So the aim of the game with the boss really is to get characters in melee with it, and depending on how many characters you have in melee will drastically change your experience against this boss. So if you have 2 characters in melee with the boss, it will hit one of them with its Living Battering Ram ability. And this ability, it doesn't do a huge deal of damage, although it will do direct damage, which will, without a doubt, chew through the health bar of whatever it hits. That can't be avoided. However, it's a lot more manageable than, say, the damage of the Death Scream. The problem with the Living Battering Ram is its ability to throw around your characters. And if you have a character adjacent to the Screamer Killer, so say on this hex here, and it gets hit with the Living Battering Ram, it gets thrown 2 hexes away from where it's standing. Exactly 2 hexes, not up to 2 hexes, so exactly 2 hexes. So it won't be thrown into this hex, or this hex, but it will be thrown anywhere within a 120-degree cone. So if it's standing here, it will get thrown either here, 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 here. And where it lands is random. And that degree of randomness can mess up your positioning. Also, if you have anything that happens to be standing around back here and that gets hit, that also gets displaced. So again, that can mess with your positioning. and it can also deal serious damage to perhaps a weaker character that you're trying to hide sort of further back out of the way to avoid them being killed too easily by the boss. What I used to do, well, first of all, you're using X to row because this is the mechanical team. So the last thing you want is row to be hit by the living battering ram. So how can you prevent this? Well, the way that the boss prioritizes who it attacks with its living battering ram is it takes a look at the 2 available targets, because it will use that ability when there are 2 targets in melee, and it will say to itself, which one will have its health reduced to the lowest percentage after I perform this attack? So if you have Row and Tan in melee, so if I had my Row and my Tan in melee with it, well, my Tan has lower armor and lower health than Row. So the boss will see that and go, okay, Tan is the target that I want to hit with Living Battering Ram, and he'll get thrown. And that's not really a problem because Tan can just move back into position in that situation. That's not what I'm going to be doing, but this is just for the sake of demonstration, I suppose. But you definitely don't want Row to get hit, to get thrown away by this ability. Because if he gets thrown by it, then before you can move him back into position, all of your mechanical summons in the next turn will have attacked. So you'll miss out on the extra passive hits from all of those summons. So what you'll want when you're building up your team against the Screamer Killer, I found, was to build up the strength of Row first. Because if you have Row built up to a high level, not only will, again, he does the most damage out of all of the mechanical units, but also if he has a large degree of armor and health, then there's less of a chance of him being selected to be thrown than, say, anything that's weaker than him. And I had a Ravas that I used a lot, and I essentially made sure that I kept my Ravas at a level where she had lower health and armor than Row, and I'd put her and Row in melee with the Screamer Killer, and Ravas would get hit every time with the Living Battering Ram, rather than Row, so I wouldn't have to worry about him being shifted out of position. So you may want to find a mechanical unit on your team, essentially, whilst you're building your team up, to put in melee with the boss so that it gets thrown instead of Row. And you want it to be tough enough to survive being living battering rammed, or, if you use, say, Aleph, then she can heal herself, so that's quite handy. Although she's not an optimal unit to use in this battle, but again, if you're just building up and you don't have any other options, Aleph could be a good one. I used Ravas. But yeah, just make sure that they're weaker by a significant degree than Row. And I say significant because if Row just happens to take a bit of damage from elsewhere and the sacrificial, shall we say, character doesn't, Row can end up in a situation where he might get reduced to a lower health percentage by an attack from the boss than the other character. So the boss will then start hitting Row with the Living Battering Ram instead of the character that you want him to hit, which can end up being disastrous. So make sure that Row isn't taking any additional damage, or if you want to give yourself a bit more leeway, then make sure that your character, whilst being able to survive the boss, as I said, is still plenty weaker than Row. So that's a nice cushion to have. Now, I talk about you want to be using this technique whilst you're building up this team. Now, why do I say that? Well, the boss is extremely easy to control if you can have 3 characters in melee with it. When you have 3 characters in melee with it, it will use its unparalleled ferocity. And the notable thing about this ability is that it deals piercing damage. So if your characters have stats high enough, armor stats high enough to withstand this, it will essentially do no damage. You can have 3 characters standing in melee with the unit, and with the Screamer Killer, and it can whack away at them all day with this ability, and it won't do anything, as long as their stats are high enough. But of course, getting your characters to that point in the first place, especially when this ability here is doing, roughly 1,200 damage on average. Sorry. Yeah, roughly 1,200 damage on average. Is easier said than done. And of course, if you're trying to upgrade your mechanical team, well, Actus, Ro, and Tan all require the same upgrade materials. So you can only really upgrade one at a time if you want to get them upgraded fast, or you have to upgrade them all at the same time, but very slowly, which I wouldn't recommend, because you need to have Ro in a position where he can survive the boss well in melee. So I took a piecemeal approach. I took Ro up to Diamond first, then Tan, then Actus. But in the intervening time, Tan and Actus were at, low gold levels, which meant that I couldn't just put them in melee with this boss and have them sit there and come up smelling of roses whenever it used this ability. They would have been instantly wiped out by it. So I had to be a lot more kind of careful with their positioning, which is why I used the method with Ravas and Ro to just absorb multiple living battering rams whilst everyone else stood well out of range of it. But yeah, once you're in a position where you can get 3 characters in melee around the boss and have them happily survive it, you've pretty much reached the end game of this boss, and you can do wild amounts of damage to it without any repercussions. And that's essentially what I'll be showing in this replay. And I think the most interesting part of this will just be how I open up, because I know how the boss works, and I based my opening moves on that knowledge. If you want to have a good insight into how this boss works, the mechanics of it, I won't explain them here, but I will refer you to a video by Nandi, which was made about 3 months ago, so that's I think around July of 2024, where he did a sort of an in-depth guide on the proper mechanics of the boss and how it will act in certain situations. And he basically covers all of the ground, but that's sort of like a more general, conceptual look at the boss, whereas this, I will be taking you through a battle I've done, kind of explaining what I'm doing and why along the way. So hopefully that's enough of a difference to provide some actual kind of useful knowledge on top of what he's already done, because I don't want to just reiterate other people's work, at least, work as far as I'm aware of. And so another, not hyper-aggression, I think it's just the trait, yes, the trait, instinctive behaviour. So the Screamer Killer will act in 2 ways. This is in Nandi's video, so I'll just go over it briefly, but depending on whether it has a Tyrannid Warrior within 2 hexes of it or not, will drastically change its behaviour. So that's essentially something you want to be looking out for, is you want to kill the warriors or not kill them, but if you sort of kill them on one run and then don't kill them on the next, don't expect it to behave the same way, essentially. But again, watch Nandi's video, he'll explain it much better and much more nicely than I possibly can, as I'm trying to get through something else. So its other abilities, hyper-aggression. This is kind of annoying. It's especially if you kind of mess up and you only have one character. If you have a character thrown by him, and then he can use his ranged attack afterwards, which does quite a lot of damage. But ultimately, if you have 2 characters in melee with him, especially Ravas, if she gets hit with the living battering ram, she doesn't get thrown back, so the Screamer Killer will hit her with that ability, then it will use its normal melee attack on her. So essentially, what I was doing with Ravas, she was taking all of the damage from this boss every turn. And as long as she can survive that, then that's fine. If she can't, then you might have to do some stuff where you kind of, when Ravas dies, okay, you then juggle Tan into melee with the boss, and then hopefully Tan will survive that. If he doesn't survive that, then you kind of keep rotating either characters or summons into melee with the boss, so that they get killed, instead of Ro being, or so that they get hit with the living battering ram instead of Ro, because Ro being hit with the living battering ram is pretty disastrous. That's something you may have to do again whilst you're developing your team. Blistering Assault, yep, that's quite important. Again, if you're trying to hide weaker units behind characters that you are using to sort of absorb its melee attacks, well, they're going to get hit by the melee attacks as well. Which again is why I used Ravas, because she gets hit with the Living Battering Ram. She's a big target, so she doesn't get thrown. So she gets hit with this melee attack again, and as long as I keep her well out of the way of any other characters that I have on the board, characters or units, then none of them are going to be affected by this ability. Adrenal Surge, again, quite important. If you're using, say, Ravas, or you mess up and get your summons killed, then you increase its chance of dealing critical hits. So you ideally don't want to be spawning summons that are just going to die, because all that will do is make the boss hit you harder. And if you're sort of on the borderline between overpowering it and not overpowering it, that can sort of tip the balance against you in terms of favour. But yeah, I think that's all of the abilities that I've gone over. Of course, it has a critical chance, which starts low, but if it kills a lot of things with its Adrenal Surge, then that will quickly ramp up in its percentage chance of succeeding. I think that's essentially everything I need to go through with the preliminaries. So I think I'll stop this video here, and then I'll go over the battle proper in a separate video. So yes, that is that.